These days, if you work in the environment or climate sectors, you have probably heard a lot about climate resilience. People are talking about it everywhere. And it sounds pretty good, right? Climate resilience, it's a good thing. Well, today, I'm going to share with you some ideas about climate resilience, and in particular, a problem with climate resilience when it's applied to social issues or issues with communities. But first, we have to talk about what climate resilience actually is. So imagine a farmer right here in Rwanda. This picture was taken in Musanze district in the foothills of Volcanoes National Park. And Musanze district is pretty much the potato capital of Rwanda, and national data estimates that 70 to 80% of people in Musanze district are in agriculture, mostly as smallholder farmers. So, as an environment and development economist and a conservation social scientist, I've been working in these kind of forest-adjacent agricultural areas across East and Central Africa for over 10 years. And what I've seen, and what the research is telling us, is that floods and heavy rain that essentially destroy farmers' crops is one of the most pressing issues facing climate change vulnerable people across the region right now. So imagine this farmer, heavy rain comes and essentially washes away that uppermost layer of topsoil that's holding their potatoes in place. And as their potatoes are washing down the foothills of Volcanoes National Park, their income washes away too. Then let's say, later on, they're able to get things back on track. And they buy some seeds and they're able to replant their potatoes and later sell those potatoes in the market to get some income. The question for resilience becomes, at what point has the farmer recovered from the shock of those heavy rains that destroyed their crop? Is it when the farmer takes those potatoes to the market and gets that income back? Is it when someone else in their household or their community goes and finds some alternative job to get some money to keep the family afloat? These are the fundamental questions that we ask about climate resilience when we're talking about social issues, households, and communities. We also have to ask what indicators or measures are we using to assess whether or not the farmer has recovered, and who decides if the farmer has recovered. So, when we think about this economically, we can think about it in terms of income or assets. So if you look at this chart, a resilient system state is one where the household or the individual, even the community, is able to bounce back to this level of income that they were at prior to the shock. So we can also think about this, not just in terms of income and assets. This socioeconomic income asset version of this definition is really common in conservation and climate social science research. But we can also think about it psychologically. So outside of the research world, we often think about resilience as, someone who's able to recover or bounce back from incredibly challenging, emotional or painful experiences in their life. That person's resilient, they're psychologically resilient. So this line doesn't just have to represent income or assets, it can also represent well-being. At the same time, we can also think about this in terms of a degenerative state. So say someone actually just isn't able to get their income back up to the same level as it was prior to the shock. So that person could be considered in a degenerative state rather than a resilient state. So what might be a problem with this kind of common researchy definition of resilience and climate resilience? Well, what happens if that initial state wasn't a desirable one? What if the person wasn't happy in that initial situation? Or what if they were in a state of poverty and their income was incredibly low and they didn't want to be in that situation anymore? So at that point, they're seeking to bounce back from a shock to an undesirable place in the first place. So in our recent research, this was conducted around Volcanoes National Park in affiliation with the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund. We talked to about 1,400 community members around Volcanoes National Park. And through interviews and surveys, we asked people to, describe to us how they're recovering from these kind of climate shocks and really how they understand it and think about it. And we actually did find that most people weren't talking about bouncing back to the point that they were at prior to a shock. They were talking about improving upon their previous situation. And they told us about their plans and their aspirations for the future and their goals, what they wanted for their children. And so we actually came to find that people were offering a brighter vision of the future and a more expansive vision for the future in light of climate change than what was offered by the framework of climate resilience. So this led us to the framework of regeneration instead. So regeneration is essentially, instead of trying to bounce back to that point you were at before, there's a system in place that has the pieces and the structures that can support you or provide a pathway to improving upon your previous situation, not merely bouncing back to where you were before. So the question now becomes, what does this tell us for climate research and climate policy? So let's start with policy. If we're already here, and many people in the audience are involved in climate policy or environmental policy, if we're already here and we're already talking about policy that can support people to achieve climate resilience, but those same people are thinking about resilience not as bouncing back to where they were before, but improving upon their previous situation, then our concept of climate resilience is limiting to people. And so why are we limiting people? Why make bouncing back to the place you were before a best case scenario when that's actually not what people want? So what if we could design policy that supports systems to create a pathway to a better future in light of climate change and not merely bouncing back to the place we were before? So that's policy. Now let's talk about research. So for researchers, this latest kind of understanding of climate resilience rather than regeneration yields some really important findings that tell us that sometimes our academic frameworks and theories don't necessarily align with what people are experiencing in their day-to-day and their desires. So sometimes, as researchers, we need to leave our frameworks and our theories at home, and we need to just listen to people's lived experience and the way that they're thinking about things and the way that they're defining their own recovery from climate shocks. So this means we need to listen to people's direct words. And when I say direct words, I mean direct words in the language that they speak. So on the slopes of Volcanoes National Park, when we're talking to community members, we're not speaking in English. We're speaking in Rwanda's local language, Kinyarwanda. And this provides a great example of where the research is really lacking, where there's a big gap. Because let's take the example of defining resilience. When we understand resilience in English, it can be defined as, this academic definition of bouncing back or recovering to where you were before. But in Kinyarwanda, as many people in the audience know much better than I do, resilience can be understood with combinations of different phrases. So let's take some easy examples, like kwikura mubibazo, getting yourself out of trouble or a problem. Or we commonly hear psychological words like kwihangana, which is like patience, endurance, tolerance, or imbaraga, which is strength. And so, unfortunately, at the moment, in the climate social science and conservation social science literatures, research is being published in English and French-only journals, and there isn't a systematic record of how these concepts are being translated into and out of local language. So it's a real missing piece. And something is being figuratively and literally lost in translation in the research. So in order to address this issue, in our research, we're publishing the direct words of community members in Kinyarwanda side by side with the English in pursuit of a better climate and conservation social science broadly, but also right here in Rwanda. So a Rwandan researcher can come back to our publication and say, those are the words that community members said. Those were the exact questions that were asked in Kinyarwanda that led researchers to decide that maybe regeneration was a better framework than climate resilience. So all this to say, sometimes we need to leave our academic theories and frameworks at home and really listen to what people are saying and how they conceptualize how they're recovering from climate shocks, not bringing our academic theories all the time. So, in conclusion, I want to leave you with one question, and that is, what if, in research and policy, instead of striving for this climate resilience, what if we take the words of about 1,400 community members around Volcanoes National Park seriously and take their direct words seriously? And instead of striving for climate resilience, we strive for a regenerative future in light of climate change. Thank you.